The rhythmic beep 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 of the monitor was a cruel countdown, each pulse a sliver of hope fading. 10-year-old Mateo Morales lay utterly still, a pale ghost against the pristine sheets of Grandview Medical Center, his small body betraying a catastrophic internal battle. Dr. Arlo Sterling, chief neurosurgeon, normally a pillar of meticulous control, felt the icy grip of panic tightening. His brow, usually smooth, was now a furrowed landscape of desperation. "Damn it, where is it?" he hissed, his voice strained, as yet another conventional attempt to staunch the aggressive bleed near Teo's spine failed. The delicate instruments, meant to save, now felt useless in his trembling hands. Mrs. Morales whimpered, clutching her husband's hand, their eyes fixed on their son, who was slipping away before their very eyes. Every second stretched into an eternity of agonizing helplessness. Tucked away in the corner, almost part of the wall, stood Nurse Imani Aching. Her unassuming uniform and quiet demeanor made her easily overlooked amidst the elite scramble. But as the room's despair deepened, Imani's gaze, steady and perceptive, lingered on a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor in Teo's left leg. A strange, unorthodox flicker of understanding ignited in her. The renowned doctors saw only chaos. Imani, however, sensed a hidden truth, a path no one else dared to imagine, a quiet promise stirring within her to bring Teo back from the brink. The air in Operating Room 3 at Grandview Medical Center, usually a sanctuary of controlled brilliance, now crackled with a desperate, metallic tang. Dr. Arlo Sterling, his brow furrowed in a mask of mounting panic, barked orders that no one seemed able to fulfill. "More suction. We're losing too much blood, damn it." His voice, usually a calm command, was now edged with a raw, guttural fear. The gleam of the sterile environment, the polished steel and harsh lights, only served to amplify the stark reality of Teo Morales' failing life. The boy, barely a decade old, lay vulnerable on the table, his small chest barely rising and falling, a tragic tableau of childhood innocence ravaged by fate and now, it seemed, by the limits of even the most advanced medicine. Just then, the heavy double doors hissed open, and Dr. Kaito Ishikawa strode in, his presence immediately injecting a colder, more cynical energy into the room. Head of ER, Ishikawa was a man whose sharp intellect was matched only by his disdain for anything less than empirical data. He surveyed the chaotic scene, his gaze sweeping from the frantic neurosurgical team to Sterling's strained face, finally settling, with a dismissive flicker, on Imani Aching, standing quietly by the side, an almost invisible observer. "What's the status, Arlo?" Ishikawa's tone was clipped, devoid of the emotional urgency gripping the rest of the room. He didn't wait for an answer. "Vitals are plummeting. We're running out of time." Sterling, his hands momentarily still above Teo, looked up, his face a grim mask of defeat and frustration. "We can't pinpoint the source. It's a deep, diffuse ooze, but too aggressive to be just capillary. It's near the original injury site, but manipulating it further risks severing more nerve tissue. We're losing him, Kaito." The admission hung heavy in the air, a bell tolling for the young patient. The elite team, renowned for their precision and unparalleled success, was at a loss. The sophisticated monitors beeped an increasingly urgent, mournful rhythm, each pulse a testament to Teo's fading hold on life. Imani's heart ached for Teo, for his parents, who watched from the viewing gallery, their faces etched with unspeakable agony. But more than sorrow, a fierce, quiet certainty was beginning to bloom within her. The subtle tremor in Teo's left leg, that rhythmic, almost imperceptible spasm, had intensified. It was a language she understood, born from makeshift operating tents in dust-filled fields where monitors were a luxury and a doctor's only guide was their hands and instincts. She knew, with a certainty that transcended Grandview's glossy protocols, that it wasn't just diffuse bleeding. There was a specific point, a tiny, arterial leak, hidden in the surrounding trauma, communicating its distress through that tremor, a unique neurological feedback loop she'd witnessed in extreme, unconventional scenarios. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice, soft yet clear, cutting through the rising clamor. "Dr. Sterling, if I may. I've observed a consistent tremor in Teo's left leg. It seems to correlate with a deep, focal pressure point, possibly indicative of a specific arterial rupture, not a general ooze." The room went silent, a tense, incredulous quiet. Sterling, startled by her interruption, slowly turned, his eyes narrowing. Nurse Aching, now is not the time for speculative theories. We're dealing with a complex spinal bleed, not a sprained ankle. His tone was sharp, his frustration barely contained. He valued discipline and hierarchy above all else, especially now, with his reputation hanging precariously by a thread. Ishikawa, however, was less subtle. He let out a short, dismissive laugh. A tremor? Nurse, with all due respect, we have a complete picture from the MRI and our intraoperative findings. We're not looking for tea leaves and gut feelings here. This isn't a village clinic. This is Grandview. Stick to your duties. His words were a cold, calculated dismissal, designed to put her firmly back in her place. The other nurses and junior doctors exchanged uneasy glances, accustomed to such put-downs, but still uncomfortable witnessing them. A flush crept up Imani's neck, but her resolve, though quiet, remained unshaken. With all due respect, Doctor, my experience in crisis situations, without the aid of advanced imaging, has taught me to identify subtle physiological cues. The tremor, it's specific. I believe the bleeder is located just superior to the L3 vertebra, slightly off-center to the left, at a depth of approximately 3 centimeters. She spoke with a quiet authority that belied her humble posture, a testament to her profound, if unconventional, knowledge. Sterling stared at her, then back at Teo's exposed spine, his mind racing through countless textbooks and surgical diagrams. L3, off-center? It made no conventional sense, yet her conviction was palpable. But the thought was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by the ingrained protocols and the weight of his own distinguished career. Impossible. We've meticulously explored that region. There's no indication of a discrete arterial leak. Nurse, I appreciate your zeal, but please, allow the surgical team to focus. He waved her off, turning his attention back to the increasingly frantic monitor readouts. Ishikawa stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. Arlo, we need a solution, not a bedside psychic. My suggestion, we proceed with a broad-spectrum embolic agent. It's high risk, could damage nerve function further, but it's our last resort to stop the hemorrhage. His words were grim, but logical in the face of conventional failure. The room held its breath, knowing the terrible implications of such a drastic measure. Imani, however, knew it was a gamble Teo might not survive, especially when a precise, less invasive solution was within their grasp. The tension was now almost unbearable, a suffocating blanket of despair. Teo's life hung by the thinnest of threads, and the elite doctors, trapped by their own brilliance and rigid adherence to protocol, were about to make a desperate choice. The sterile air in Grandview's operating suite thickened with the metallic tang of fear. Teo's vital signs, projected onto a large monitor, now screamed a chaotic symphony of distress. The numbers plummeted further, blood pressure sinking, heart rate erratic, oxygen saturation dwindling into a dangerously low red zone. The rhythmic beat of the cardiac monitor, once a steady presence, now quickened to a frantic, broken staccato, each pulse a fragile thread threatening to snap. Dr. Sterling, usually a pillar of unflappable precision, felt the cold tendrils of panic grip him. His meticulously planned world was unraveling with horrifying speed. He barked orders, but his voice was strained, edged with a desperation he rarely allowed to surface. More pressure. Is the flow rate on the suction adequate? I need better visualization, now. But the bleed remained elusive, a phantom predator consuming Teo from within. His brow was furrowed so deeply it looked etched in stone, his usually steady hands now trembled faintly as he adjusted instruments, his movements less certain. He was trapped, cornered by the very protocols he swore by, paralyzed by the weight of his reputation and the impossible task before him. Dr. Ishikawa, ever the pragmatist, saw the writing on the wall. Arlo, we're losing him. The conventional approach is failing. We have to consider the embolic agent now. His tone was devoid of emotion, a stark reflection of the grim reality. He was ready to sacrifice potential nerve function to save a life, a choice born of necessity, but one that gnawed at the periphery of Imani's conscience. Imani, standing at the periphery, felt an urgent, primal thrum in her chest. Her eyes, usually soft, were now sharp, scanning Teo's small, vulnerable body. The rhythmic tremor in his left leg, almost imperceptible amidst the chaos, had become more pronounced, a subtle Morse code only she seemed to be receiving. It wasn't a spasm, it was a rhythmic pulse, a telltale sign of a vessel in distress, and critically, it pointed to exactly where the deep-seated bleed was. It was a language she understood from makeshift tents and dusty fields, where the human body's quiet whispers were often the only diagnostic tools available. "Dr. Sterling," she interjected, her voice cutting through the rising panic with an unusual clarity. "With respect, the embolic agent is too broad. It's a risk we don't need to take. I believe I can pinpoint the exact source. It's not where we're looking. Look at his left leg." Sterling spun around, his face a mask of frustration and anger. "Neurosurgeon, I commend your observational skills, but this is not a village clinic. This is Grandview. We are operating on a spinal column, not a battlefield casualty. Your intuition is an irresponsible distraction." His words were sharp, meant to cut her off, to reassert the hierarchy he was rapidly losing control of. Ishikawa scoffed, a short, dismissive sound that was more withering than any direct insult. "Tactile sense? Pressure points? Are we performing acupuncture now? Arlo, don't entertain this. We have minutes, not a day spa consultation. Teo's stats are crashing. Make the call." And Sterling, his face etched with grim resignation, nodded slowly, defeat flickering in his eyes as he looked at Teo's plummeting vitals. "Prepare the embolic agent, Dr. Ishikawa. We have no other choice." His voice was heavy, a death knell in the tense room. This was the critical error, the adherence to protocol over an intuitive, life-saving insight. They were choosing a drastic, potentially life-altering measure for Teo, ignoring the quiet, precise solution that stood before them. Teo's parents, Mrs. Morales leaning heavily on her husband, had watched the scene unfold with dawning horror. They had put their absolute faith in Grandview's elite. Now, they saw the fear in Sterling's eyes, heard the grim finality in Ishikawa's voice. Their son, their little Teo, was slipping away. Their eyes, wide with unshed tears, flickered from the frantic doctors to Imani. They didn't know why, but there was something in her quiet determination, a stark contrast to the frantic energy around her, that offered a desperate, fragile tendril of hope. They had heard her speak, heard her disregarded suggestion. Imani felt the collective weight of their despair, felt Teo's life force dimming. The monitors shrieked a new, more terrifying alarm. Teo's breath was shallow, his small body fighting a losing battle. The moment was no longer emergent, it was critical. There was no more time for quiet suggestions or polite interventions. Her years of improvising under unthinkable pressure, of making impossible choices to save lives, surged to the forefront. This wasn't about protocol or hierarchy, it was about a child's life. With a resolve that startled even herself, Imani stepped forward, moving with a quiet confidence that defied the chaotic energy of the room. Her eyes met Sterling's, then Ishikawa's, holding their gaze with an unwavering intensity. The sound of her voice, though not loud, cut through the escalating din, stopping them both in their tracks. "Stop," she commanded, the single word ringing with an authority that left no room for doubt. "You don't understand. I can save him. Let me handle it." Isn't it incredible how often the quietest voices hold the most profound wisdom? Imani's moment here reminds us all of those times we've felt overlooked, yet knew we had something unique to offer. If you're cheering for Imani, if you love seeing the underdog prove their worth, then you belong here. We invite you to become a cherished part of our global community. By simply clicking that subscribe button, you're not just joining us, you're helping us bring more thrilling, heartwarming, and empowering stories like Imani's to life. Thank you for being with us on this journey. Welcome to the family. The air in the operating room, moments ago a tempest of panicked commands and desperate pleas, now hung heavy and still, charged with an almost unbearable tension. Imani's declaration, "Let me handle it," resonated like a gavel strike, silencing the chaos but amplifying the silent judgments. Dr. Sterling, his face a mask of disbelief struggling against utter despair, finally found his voice, a choked whisper. Nurse Aching, with all due respect, this is a spinal bleed. A neurosurgical procedure. You're a nurse. His words were meant to assert hierarchy, to re-establish order, but they sounded hollow, devoid of true authority in the face of his own failing expertise. Dr. Ishikawa, ever the cynic, scoffed openly. Imani, I appreciate your zeal, but we're talking about a 10-year-old boy's life, not a field dressing. This is a sterile environment, a highly specialized situation. But Teo's parents, their faces etched with raw grief and fear, saw past the titles and protocols. They saw only a glimmer of hope in Imani's unwavering gaze. Please, Teo's mother whispered, her voice cracking, reaching out a trembling hand toward Sterling. What do we have to lose? Please, doctor, just let her try. Teo's father, a man usually stoic, simply nodded, his eyes pleading, begging Sterling to relinquish the reins of a situation he clearly couldn't control. Sterling looked from the parents' desperate faces to Imani's calm, resolute eyes. His reputation, his career, the very foundation of his meticulous world, hung in the balance. Letting a nurse, a rural-trained nurse, take over a critical neurosurgical case was unthinkable, professional suicide. Yet, the monitor's steady, unforgiving decline, Teo's fading pulse, the growing crimson stain on the surgical drape, these were irrefutable facts. He was losing. He had already lost. With a shuddering breath that felt like the collapse of his entire world, Sterling gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. 5 minutes, he rasped, his voice raw. You have 5 minutes. It wasn't a concession of trust, but a surrender born of utter defeat. Imani didn't acknowledge the time limit. Her focus was absolute, honed by years of making life-or-death decisions with seconds to spare. Every fear, the professional censure, the potential for failure, the sheer audacity of her act, receded behind a wall of pure, intuitive concentration. This wasn't about her anymore, it was about Teo. His small, failing body was calling to her, and she had to answer. She moved towards the operating table with a grace born of purpose, her steps silent, deliberate. The bright, sterile lights of Grandview Medical Center, so different from the flickering generators of her past, seemed to intensify the scrutiny on her every move. She wasn't carrying a scalpel or a clamp, her hands were bare, their delicate movements already attuned to the invisible currents of life and injury. She stood beside Teo's small form, her eyes closing for a fleeting moment, as if to recalibrate, to shut out the noise and perceive only the symphony of his failing body. Sterling watched, skepticism warring with a nascent, terrifying curiosity. His arms were still crossed, a defensive posture, but his body was rigid, unable to look away. He expected fumbling, uncertainty, anything but the serene confidence radiating from her. Imani's hands, surprisingly small yet incredibly strong, hovered over Teo's spine. She didn't touch him immediately. Instead, she seemed to feel the air above his body, her fingertips dancing just millimeters from his skin, a dancer sensing the music before taking the stage. This was her unorthodox method, refined through countless crises where advanced diagnostics were a luxury and human touch the only guide. Her senses, sharpened over years of improvising with limited resources, were her most potent tools. She was searching, not just for heat or swelling, but for the subtle distortions in his energy field, the minute changes in pressure and vibration that signaled a deeper problem. She leaned in closer, her brow furrowed in concentration. The rhythmic tremor she had noticed earlier in his leg, so faint it had been dismissed, now became her anchor. Her fingertips, like antennae, began to map the subtle landscape of his back. It was an almost imperceptible mapping, a delicate tracing of invisible lines, a deep communion between her intuitive knowledge and Teo's vulnerable body. She was looking for something no machine could show, a pressure point, a specific locus where the internal hemorrhage was communicating its distress to the surface. It was a language only she seemed to understand, a whispered plea from within. In that moment, Nurse Imani Aching transformed from an unassuming background figure into the central, audacious force of Teo's desperate battle for life. The room held its breath, suspended between disbelief and the fragile hope she embodied. The air in the operating theater, already thick with the metallic tang of fear and antiseptic, solidified into an almost palpable block of tension. Imani's soft voice cut through it, a stark contrast to the urgent beeps and whirs of the machines. "Dr. Sterling," she began, her gaze unwavering, not on him, but on a precise point above Teo's lower spine. "Your right index finger, please. Just a feather-light touch, here." Her own hand, delicate yet resolute, hovered millimeters above Teo's exposed back, a silent, almost spiritual compass pointing to an invisible meridian. Dr. Sterling, chief neurosurgeon, felt a cold knot of professional humiliation twist in his gut. To be directed by a nurse, in his own operating room, on a case of this magnitude, felt like an affront to every degree and accolade he possessed. His hand, usually so steady and confident, trembled ever so slightly as he extended his index finger towards the spot she indicated. "A feather-light touch?" he thought, his mind racing. "This is surgery, not a seance." Yet, the quiet authority in Imani's eyes, the desperate plea in the Morales' tear-filled gazes, compelled him. He touched Teo's skin, an almost imperceptible brush, precisely where Imani's fingertip had guided him. "Good," Imani murmured, her voice a soothing balm. "Now, can you feel it? A very faint, almost rhythmic thrum? Like a butterfly's wing beat, deep beneath the surface?" Sterling concentrated, his brow furrowed in skepticism. He felt only the smooth, cool skin of his patient. He wanted to scoff, to declare this nonsense. But then, as he pressed just a fraction of a millimeter deeper, a flicker of something unusual. Not a conventional pulse, not a muscle spasm. It was indeed a faint, resonant vibration, different from anything he'd ever encountered in a human body. It was like a whispered secret beneath the skin, resonating with that subtle tremor Imani had first noticed in Teo's leg. A tremor his own highly trained eye had dismissed. Across the room, Dr. Ishikawa, initially dismissive, now found himself leaning forward, eyes narrowed, a strange mixture of disbelief and reluctant fascination warring on his face. He watched Sterling, a man whose medical rigor he respected above all others, now blindly following the lead of an unassuming nurse. The other nurses and residents, frozen in place, exchanged wide-eyed glances. No one dared to breathe too loudly. "Yes," Sterling said, the word escaping him like a confession. I think so." The admission itself was a surrender, an acknowledgement of a knowledge that defied his scientific understanding. Imani's expression remained serene, her focus absolute. "Excellent. Now, Dr. Sterling, I need you to slide your finger, slowly, millimeter by millimeter, just to the left. Follow the thumb. Let it guide you. It's moving towards a specific nexus, a point where the energy intensifies." Sterling, a man who mapped the human body with precision instruments and decades of surgical experience, was now being asked to navigate by a thumb and energy. It was absurd. Yet, his finger, guided by Imani's soft, hypnotic instructions, began to move. His movements, initially stiff and hesitant, became more fluid, almost involuntary. He was no longer leading, he was being led. The room held its breath, a collective gasp of silent anticipation. Mrs. Morales clasped her hands over her mouth, tears silently streaming, her husband's arm a steel band around her. They watched Imani, their silent prayers hanging in the air like incense. Sterling's highly sensitive fingertips, usually focused on the cold, hard reality of bone and tissue, were now tuned to something else entirely. He felt the subtle shift, the almost imperceptible increase in that strange, rhythmic vibration. It was a language he'd never learned, yet Imani was translating it for him, word by word, sensation by sensation. His initial skepticism was slowly, irrevocably, giving way to a nascent sense of awe. This wasn't guesswork, it was a form of precision he couldn't grasp. "There," Imani whispered, her voice barely audible, yet ringing with absolute certainty. "Feel that slight welling, Dr. Sterling? The focal point of the tremor? That's it. That's where it's concentrating its distress. Apply a gentle, steady pressure, now. Not too hard, just enough to coax it." Sterling's finger paused, hovering at the exact spot. He could feel it now, unmistakably. A tiny, almost imperceptible knot of sensation, a localized increase in that mysterious thrum. It was like finding a secret spring beneath the desert floor. He applied pressure, delicately, precisely, as instructed. The operating room fell into an even deeper, more profound silence, broken only by the steady, anxious rhythm of Teo's heart monitor. Every eye was on Sterling's hand, a single point of desperate hope in a desperate room. The fate of Teo Morales, and indeed, the reputation of Grandview's elite medical team, now rested on Imani's impossible intuition and Sterling's grudging surrender to it. The silence in the operating room, previously thick with a desperate, suffocating dread, now stretched taut with an agonizing, almost unbearable anticipation. Every breath held, every pulse thrummed, not just in Teo's frail body, but in the chests of everyone gathered around the sterile field. Dr. Sterling's gloved finger, guided by Imani's almost imperceptible whispers, maintained its delicate, steady pressure. Time seemed to warp, stretching out into an eternity where seconds felt like hours, and the fate of a small boy hung suspended in the fragile balance. The frantic, irregular dance on Teo's vital monitors had been a terrifying symphony of impending collapse just moments ago. Now, in this profound quiet, the change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first, like the first pale hint of dawn after a long, dark night. A resident, eyes glued to the display, gasped softly. The blood pressure, which had been plummeting with alarming speed, held steady. Then, unbelievably, it began a slow, hesitant climb. The erratic pulse, a frantic drumbeat of distress, started to find a more regular rhythm, its frantic urgency subtly softening. Dr. Sterling, still maintaining the pressure Imani had indicated, felt a jolt of something akin to electric current shoot through him. Was it working? His years of rigorous training screamed at him to doubt, to question, to find the conventional explanation. But there was none. There was only Imani's quiet certainty, the undeniable, physical proof now registering on the machines, and the strange, subtle hum he could still feel beneath his finger, no longer a distress signal, but a faint, reassuring pulse. Then, the monitor let out a single, clear, steady beep, a sound that, moments ago, would have been drowned out by the chaos. Now, it resonated like a bell, pure and unwavering. Then another. And another. The frantic, high-pitched alerts that had been blaring just minutes prior had fallen silent, replaced by a confident, rhythmic cadence. The numbers on the screen stabilized, then began a definitive, undeniable shift towards safer parameters. A collective, shuddering exhale swept through the room. It wasn't a cheer, not yet, but a profound, primal release of held breath, a physical manifestation of the sheer terror that had gripped them all. Nurses visibly sagged against sterile trays, their shoulders slumping as if shedding an enormous, unseen weight. A medical student, tears silently tracing paths down his masked face, covered his mouth with a trembling hand. Dr. Ishikawa, the ever-cynical head of ER, stood frozen, his sharp gaze fixed on the monitors. His jaw, previously set in a rigid line of grim expectation, relaxed fractionally. A flicker of something utterly uncharacteristic, a mix of disbelief and dawning awe, crossed his features. He couldn't deny it. The bleeding had stopped. The vitals were stabilizing. The boy was pulling back from the brink. Sterling slowly, cautiously, eased his finger. Imani's gaze met his, her eyes conveying a gentle, almost imperceptible nod. The bleeding did not resume. Teo's breathing, which had been shallow and gasping, deepened, becoming more even. The rhythmic tremor Imani had detected in his leg, the tiny, crucial detail everyone else had missed, was gone. A wave of relief, so potent it was almost dizzying, washed over the operating room. It was not just a relief of medical success, but the profound emotional catharsis of witnessing a life snatched back from the precipice, against all odds, against all conventional wisdom. The air, heavy moments before with the stench of fear and the metallic tang of blood, now felt lighter, charged with a fragile, precious hope. Dr. Sterling straightened up slowly, his eyes still wide with a dawning comprehension, staring first at Teo, then at the monitor, and finally, turning to Imani. His meticulously composed demeanor, so famously unshakable, had completely fractured. His voice, when it came, was a raw, almost choked whisper, utterly devoid of his usual arrogance, trembling with an emotion he rarely displayed. It stopped, he murmured, his gaze fixed on Imani, a silent acknowledgement of her impossible feat, the bleeding. It actually stopped. He looked at her, not as a subordinate nurse, but as an oracle, a savior. The full weight of what had just happened, the extraordinary nature of Imani's intervention, settled upon him. He had been rigid, dismissive, arrogant. He had risked a child's life with his pride. And Imani, with nothing but her quiet certainty and a touch born of desperate experience, had saved them all. His awe was palpable, a silent shout in the relieved quiet. Imani, seeing the stabilizing vitals, Teo's faint, returning color, and the collective release of tension in the room, allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible sigh. Her shoulders, which had carried the immense burden of her unique knowledge and the desperate need to act, relaxed. Her expression remained serene, her focus still on Teo, a silent testament to her unwavering dedication. The triumph was not hers alone, but shared by everyone in that room, a victory for the vulnerable boy on the table, and for the unexpected wisdom that had saved him. The gleaming Grandview Medical Center had just witnessed a miracle, delivered not by its celebrated specialists, but by the humble hands of a nurse who knew how to listen to the body's secret language. The silence that followed the cessation of the bleed was profound, heavy with the collective holding of breath, then shattered by a synchronized exhalation of relief. Dr. Sterling, still crouched over Teo, his earlier panic now a distant, almost foreign memory, slowly straightened. His surgical mask, damp with sweat, could not hide the tremor in his hands, nor the profound, almost spiritual awe in his eyes as he looked at Imani. The meticulously maintained facade of the chief neurosurgeon, the polished certainty, had crumbled, replaced by a raw, unvarnished humility. He looked around the room, meeting the gaze of every single person present, the stunned residents, the wide-eyed nurses, even the cynical Dr. Ishikawa. His voice, usually precise and authoritative, was now thick with emotion, surprisingly vulnerable. We were lost, he began, his gaze settling back on Imani, who still stood by Teo's side, her hand gently resting on the boy's arm, feeling for a steady pulse. My team, the best Grandview has to offer, was out of options. Out of time. We would have lost him. He paused, taking a visible, shaky breath. Nurse Aching, she saw what none of us could. She knew what none of us dared to imagine. She saved his life. She saved us from a tragedy. A collective murmur rippled through the operating theater. This wasn't just an acknowledgement, it was a public confession from the top, a revolutionary admission of fallibility from a man who prided himself on absolute control. Dr. Ishikawa, who had been a statue of skepticism moments ago, pushed off the wall he'd been leaning against, his sharp features softened by a grudging admiration that was palpable. He didn't speak, but his slight nod towards Imani was more eloquent than any speech, a rare admission of being utterly, spectacularly wrong. But the most potent validation came from outside the sterile confines of professional respect. Teo's parents, who had been watching through the observation gallery glass, now burst through the double doors, their faces a mixture of exhausted terror and overwhelming gratitude. Mrs. Morales, tears streaming down her face, didn't even glance at Sterling or Ishikawa. Her eyes locked onto Imani, and she rushed forward, engulfing the unassuming nurse in a fierce, trembling embrace. Thank you, she sobbed into Imani's shoulder, her voice choked with relief. Thank you, thank you, thank you, you saved our son. You saved our boy. Mr. Morales, equally overcome, gripped Imani's hand, tears in his own eyes, a silent vow of eternal gratitude. Imani, caught in the emotional storm, gently returned the mother's embrace. Her own eyes, usually so serene, now held a depth of quiet empathy. She didn't seek the adulation, she simply understood the relief, having witnessed such moments countless times in far more desperate settings. He's going to be okay, she murmured softly, her voice a balm in the chaotic joy. He's a fighter. Sterling, witnessing this profound exchange, felt a deeper shift within himself. He realized that Imani's skill wasn't just about technique, it was about connection, about an understanding of the human body and spirit forged in a different kind of crucible. Where did you learn such a specific touch, Neurosurgeon?" he asked, his voice genuinely curious, devoid of any prior arrogance. It was unlike anything I've ever encountered. A quiet voice, a senior nurse who had worked with Imani for years, stepped forward. "Imani spent years with Doctors Without Borders, Dr. Sterling," she explained, her voice filled with quiet pride. "In refugee camps, conflict zones, after natural disasters. She didn't have fancy equipment, no MRI machines, no sterile operating theaters. She had her hands, her intuition, and sheer will. She's improvised countless times, performed field surgeries with what little she had. That tactile sense, it's what she developed to find what technology couldn't, to save lives where hope was scarce." The revelation hung in the air, a stark contrast to the gleaming, high-tech world of Grandview. It painted a picture of Imani not just as a nurse, but as a warrior of compassion, a medical artist whose canvas was the fragility of human life in the most challenging conditions. This wasn't just a qualification, it was a life story etched into her very being. It explained her quiet confidence, her unwavering focus, her deep, intuitive understanding. She was a woman forged in crisis, carrying lessons that went beyond textbooks and protocols, lessons born of direct, desperate experience and an unshakable belief in healing. Despite the accolades, the heartfelt thanks, and the sudden, profound shift in the way she was perceived, Imani remained herself. She offered a small, gentle smile to Dr. Sterling, a silent acknowledgement of his humbled respect. She squeezed Mrs. Morales' hand reassuringly. Her gaze, however, kept returning to Mateo, her focus unwavering, her quiet victory found in the steady rise and fall of the boy's chest, the strengthening beat of his heart. She was a hero, undeniably, but one who wore her heroism with the quiet grace of someone who understood that the true reward was simply the chance to serve, to heal, to bring light into darkness. The transformation in that room wasn't just about her validation, it was about Grandview finally seeing the true, expansive definition of expertise. With Teo's vitals stabilizing, the air in the operating room, previously thick with panic and desperation, thinned into a palpable relief. The boy was alive, the immediate threat averted. But this wasn't just a medical victory, it was a profound shift in the human landscape of Grandview Medical Center. Teo's recovery, though long and arduous, began with a surge of hope. The internal bleeding, located and stopped with such improbable precision, left no further damage, allowing his body to focus on healing from the initial spinal injury. His parents, initially shattered, now moved with a quiet, fierce gratitude. They visited Imani every day, not just as their son's nurse, but as his savior, their eyes reflecting the deep, unspoken promise of a second chance. Teo's journey would be challenging, but he would face it with the unwavering support of his family and the silent blessings of an entire medical team that had witnessed a miracle. For Dr. Arlo Sterling, the experience was a crucible. The chief neurosurgeon, once defined by his unyielding adherence to protocol and a barely concealed arrogance, was irrevocably changed. The public acknowledgement of Imani's skill was just the first step. In the days and weeks that followed, Sterling became a quieter, more reflective leader. He found himself consulting Imani not just on medical nuances, but on patient observation, on the subtle cues that the textbooks failed to mention. He didn't abandon his meticulous nature, that was ingrained, but he married it with a newfound openness, a humility that allowed him to consider paths beyond the conventional. He began advocating for a more holistic approach to patient care, subtly shifting the culture within his department, pushing for younger residents to develop a deeper, intuitive understanding alongside their scientific rigor. His reputation, far from being diminished by admitting a nurse's superior insight, was enhanced by his capacity for growth and his unwavering commitment to patient well-being above all else. Dr. Kaito Ishikawa, the sharp, cynical head of ER, found his analytical worldview slightly askew. While he never fully embraced gut feelings, his brain was too wired for logic, he could not deny the irrefutable evidence of Imani's success. He watched her with a new, grudging respect, often catching himself observing patients with a more critical, less dismissive eye, searching for those subtle tremors or unusual pressure points that Imani seemed to innately perceive. His cynicism didn't vanish, but it softened, replaced by a cautious curiosity. He became less quick to scoff at unconventional suggestions, fostering an environment where nurses and junior doctors felt safer to voice their observations, no matter how unscientific they might initially seem. The strict lines of hierarchy in the ER, once so rigidly enforced, became a little more fluid, a little more collaborative. Imani Aching, however, remained profoundly herself. There were no grand promotions, no flashy new titles. She didn't seek them. Her authentic life was precisely what she had always done, caring for patients with a quiet, focused intensity. Yet, everything around her had changed. Nurses looked at her with admiration, often seeking her advice on difficult cases, not just for her expertise, but for her calm, reassuring presence. Doctors, once quick to overlook her, now actively sought her input, trusting her judgment implicitly. She wasn't just a nurse anymore, she was Grandview's quiet conscience, the living embodiment of the fact that wisdom often resided beyond the degrees and designations. She found herself unofficially mentoring, not with lectures, but by example, showing others how to truly see their patients. Grandview Medical Center, a bastion of elite medicine, began to subtly transform. The incident with Mateo Morales became a whispered legend, a potent reminder that innovation didn't always come from cutting-edge technology or brilliant surgical techniques, but sometimes from profound human connection and an open mind. The rigid hierarchy, while still present, became less oppressive. There was a burgeoning appreciation for the diverse forms of expertise, a greater willingness to listen to voices that had once been marginalized. Hope permeated the hospital, not just for the patients, but for the practitioners, a hope that healing could be a collaborative, deeply human endeavor. Mateo Morales continued his slow, steady recovery, eventually regaining significant mobility, a testament to the confluence of dedicated medical care and one extraordinary moment of intuitive genius. His bright, resilient spirit was a constant reminder to everyone at Grandview of the day a young boy's life hung in the balance, and a humble nurse, guided by an unseen wisdom, brought him back from the brink. Imani, watching Mateo take his first tentative steps years later, felt the same quiet satisfaction. She never stopped being the unassuming nurse, but her life, and the lives she touched, were forever enriched. Her story became a living testament that true expertise isn't merely found in titles or accolades, but in the courage to trust one's deepest instincts, an unwavering open heart, and the profound, often unexpected wisdom that emerges from a genuine dedication to human life. It was a reminder that the most powerful healing often stems from the most humble of sources. Imani's quiet strength reminds us that true heroism often blossoms from the most humble hearts, revealing profound wisdom isn't always found in grand titles, but in courage and compassion. What unexpected acts of kindness or wisdom have you witnessed that changed everything? We'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this journey with Imani touched your spirit, please consider subscribing and joining our growing global community. Your support empowers us to continue crafting more inspiring narratives, connecting us through shared human experiences. Thank you so much for watching and for being such a valued part of our collective adventure. Together, let's celebrate these incredible tales.